In 1987, a Navy SEAL vanished during a mission the government swore never happened. For decades, his disappearance was buried under classified silence. No body, no witnesses, no answers. But when a rusted helmet was unearthed in the Venezuelan jungle 36 years later, the footage inside revealed something no one was meant to see. The camera shows a mission turning on itself, a team betrayed by the very flag they served. Each frame feels wrong, like the jungle itself is holding its breath. And when the final seconds play, one chilling line echoes through the static: "We were never meant to come back." July 15th, 1987, Virginia Beach, Virginia. The sun was setting over the Virginia coastline, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples that reflected off the windows of the modest two-story home on Atlantic Avenue. Inside, Elena Vega Draven stood at the kitchen counter, watching her husband Mark meticulously fold his napkin into smaller and smaller squares. A habit she'd noticed emerged only when something weighed heavily on his mind. The kitchen still smelled of sofrito and arroz con gandules, Elena's attempt to bring comfort through her grandmother's recipes. Steam rose from their barely touched plates, the food growing cold as silence stretched between them like a physical presence. "You've hardly touched your food," Elena said softly, her fork clicking against the ceramic plate. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet kitchen. Mark looked up, his steel blue eyes focusing on her as if emerging from deep thought. "Sorry," he said, managing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's excellent. Really." He took a deliberate bite, but his movements were mechanical. Elena studied her husband's face, the sharp angles softened by the kitchen's warm light, the slight furrow between his brows that had deepened over the past week. After 11 months of marriage, she'd learned to read the subtle shifts in his demeanor. This wasn't the usual pre-deployment tension she'd grown accustomed to. "This one's different, isn't it?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. Mark's hand stilled, fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, the clink against the plate deliberate and final. "Elena," he began, then stopped, running a hand over his face. "You know I can't." I know. Classified." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. His skin felt cold despite the summer heat. "But something's wrong. I can see it." Mark stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Parade rest," she noted, another tell of his discomfort. Outside, cicadas droned in the gathering dusk, their rhythm punctuated by distant thunder rolling in from the Atlantic. "I've always trusted my instincts," he said finally, still facing the window. "They've kept me alive, kept my team alive. But this time—" He turned, reaching into his pocket. "This time, I need to trust yours." He withdrew an envelope, plain white and sealed. The paper was slightly creased, as if he'd been carrying it for days, debating. Mark crossed back to the table and placed it carefully beside Elena's plate. "Don't open it," he said, his voice taking on the quiet authority she recognized from his briefings. "Not unless something happens, not unless you have to." Elena stared at the envelope, her training as a linguist making her intensely aware of what he wasn't saying. "Mark, if something goes wrong," he continued, each word measured, "it won't be the jungle's fault, remember that." Before she could respond, he checked his watch, a practiced motion that seemed to snap him back into operational mode. "I need to finish packing." He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. His lips lingered longer than usual, as if memorizing the moment. Elena watched him disappear up the stairs, the envelope lying between them like a confession waiting to be heard. July 16th, 1987, Langley, Air Force Base, Virginia. 0430 hours. Pre-dawn fog rolled across the tarmac as Mark Draven climbed aboard the C-130, his gear bag heavy with equipment he hoped he wouldn't need. The aircraft's interior was dimly lit, the red glow casting strange shadows across the faces of his team, men he'd trained with, bled with, trusted with his life. Sergeant Paul Riggs, his second-in-command, nodded slightly as Mark took his seat. No words were exchanged, none were needed. They'd been through enough deployments together to read each other's silences. The engines roared to life, vibrating through the metal frame. Mark pulled out his small notebook, standard issue, water-resistant, and made what he hoped wouldn't be his final entry. 0430, wheels up, heading SSW, team of 6, Operation Scorpion Vale commencing as planned. God help us if we're right. He closed the notebook, tucking it into his chest pocket, and leaned back as the aircraft lifted into the gray Virginia dawn. July 17th, 1987. Amazonas State, Venezuela, 2300 hours. The jungle breathed around them, alive with nocturnal sounds that masked their movement through the dense undergrowth. Mark led his team single file, each man placing their boots exactly where the person ahead had stepped, leaving minimal trace of their passage. Their insertion point near the Orinoco River lay 10 clicks behind them. Ahead, somewhere in the tangle of vegetation and darkness, lay their objective, supposedly a compound housing a nuclear scientist who'd gone rogue. But Mark's instincts, honed through years of operations, screamed that something was wrong. The intel had been too precise, too convenient, the timeline too rushed, and the orders, strictly no communication until extraction, no matter what they found, felt off. He held up his fist, the team freezing instantly behind him. In the darkness, his night vision goggles painted the world in shades of green, turning the jungle into an alien landscape. He clicked his radio twice, checking. Nothing. As ordered, complete silence. The experimental helmet camera whirred softly, recording everything. It was new tech, still in testing phase, supposedly for post-mission analysis. Mark had never worn one before this operation. A distant sound caught his attention, metal on metal, too sharp to be natural. His team heard it too. He could sense their collective tension. That sound didn't belong here, not in this part of the jungle, not where their target was supposed to be hiding in primitive conditions. The sharp crack of a branch breaking echoed through the trees. Mark's hand shot up, signaling an immediate halt. The team froze, becoming part of the jungle's darkness. In the distance, barely audible over the natural chorus of insects and nightbirds, came the sound of gunfire. 3 shots, muffled but distinct. Mark reached for his radio, protocol warring with instinct. The order had been clear: maintain radio silence until extraction. But something was deeply wrong. His hand had just touched the transmit button when his helmet's communications system crackled and died, leaving only static in his ears. Through his night vision goggles, he watched as one by one, the small GPS trackers on his team's positions winked out on his tactical display, leaving only darkness where his men should be. July 20th, 1987. Naval Station, Norfolk, Virginia. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight as Elena walked through the base's administrative building. Her heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing through halls she'd walked countless times during her own service. But today, something felt different. The familiar faces that usually greeted her turned away, finding sudden interest in paperwork or computer screens. She'd been called in for an urgent meeting. No further details provided. 3 days had passed since Mark's deployment, and she hadn't received her usual coded check-in. The envelope he'd given her sat unopened in her desk drawer at home, growing heavier with each passing hour. 2 men waited in Conference Room B, their dark suits stark against the room's pale walls. Neither stood when she entered. The taller one, with gray temples and a face like carved granite, gestured to the chair across from them. "Mrs. Draven," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm Agent Wilson. This is Agent McCarthy. We're here about your husband." Elena sat, her spine straight, hands folded in her lap. Her training as a linguist had taught her to read more than just words. She caught the slight tension in Wilson's jaw, the way McCarthy wouldn't quite meet her eyes. "Where's Mark?" she asked, her voice steady despite the cold dread spreading through her chest. Wilson cleared his throat. "Chief Petty Officer Draven failed to return from a training exercise. We're conducting a thorough investigation into the circumstances." "Training exercise?" Elena's mind raced back to Mark's last words, his unusual behavior. "He was deployed on a classified mission. We both know that." McCarthy shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Wilson's expression remained impassive. "Mrs. Draven, the official record shows your husband was participating in routine training operations. Any other speculation would be inappropriate and potentially harmful to national security." Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping. "I have level 3 clearance. I work in naval intelligence. Don't treat me like a civilian who doesn't understand operational security." "Your clearance is irrelevant to this matter," Wilson cut in. "The situation is being handled at the appropriate level. You'll be notified of any developments through proper channels." "When?" Elena demanded, her composure cracking slightly. "When will I know what happened to my husband?" "Mrs. Draven," McCarthy spoke for the first time, his voice softer than his colleagues. "We strongly advise you not to pursue this matter further. For your own safety and peace of mind, Accept the official explanation. No questions, no speculation, no discussions with anyone about alternative scenarios. The threat, though veiled, was clear. Elena sat back, her mind racing. Years of analyzing coded messages had taught her to hear what wasn't being said. They weren't here to inform her. They were here to silence her. "Is there anything else?" she asked, her voice carefully controlled. Wilson stood, straightening his jacket. "Someone will be in touch regarding the necessary paperwork. In the meantime, maintain your regular routine." "And, Mrs. Draven?" He paused at the door. "That's an order." July 20th, 1987, somewhere in Amazonas State, Venezuela. The recovery team moved through the jungle like ghosts, their movements precise and practiced. Captain James Mitchell led the four-man unit, following coordinates that had been burned into his memory during their briefing. The air was thick with moisture, making every breath feel like drowning. They'd been inserted by helicopter at first light, touching down in a small clearing 3 clicks from the target zone. Their orders were simple: survey the area, recover any sensitive equipment, and document everything. They weren't told what had happened here, only that something had gone wrong, very wrong. Mitchell held up his fist, signaling a halt. Ahead, the dense foliage showed signs of disturbance: broken branches, scuffed earth, marks that wouldn't mean anything to civilian eyes but told a story to those who knew how to read it. "Fan out," he ordered quietly. "Grid pattern, document everything." The team spread through the area, cameras clicking softly as they photographed the scene. Mitchell knelt beside a fallen tree, examining the ground. Something caught his eye, a glint of metal half buried in the mud. He carefully excavated it. A canteen, its side crushed and torn as if by massive force. "Sir," one of his men called out softly. "Over here." Mitchell moved to where Specialist Torres crouched, holding something in his gloved hands. It was a piece of uniform fabric, shredded and caked with dried mud. The American flag patch was still partially visible, though torn nearly in half. "There's more," Torres whispered, gesturing to the surrounding area. They found it piece by piece: scattered gear, torn equipment, personal effects that told the story of a violent confrontation. A boot print preserved in hardened mud showed the impression of standard-issue SEAL tactical boots. Beside it, another print, larger, deeper, with a pattern none of them recognized. "Jesus," breathed Sergeant Cooper, the team's medic, examining a tree trunk. Dark stains marked the bark at chest height, along with deep gouges that no human tool could have made. Mitchell photographed everything, his hand steady even as his mind raced. He'd seen aftermath sites before: firefights, ambushes, explosions. This was different. The evidence spoke of violence, yes, but violence that made no sense. The damage pattern was all wrong. The spacing of the debris field suggested the team had been scattered, driven apart by something that moved faster than trained men could react to. The jungle pressed in around them, its constant sounds suddenly ominous. Mitchell felt eyes on them, though his tactical instincts told him they were alone. The recovery team worked quickly, efficiently, collecting what they could while trying not to think about what could have happened here. As they prepared to move out, Mitchell made one final sweep of the area. A glint of metal caught his eye, half buried under leaves, a small notebook. Standard military issue, water-resistant. He picked it up carefully, noting the way the spine was bent, pages crumpled. The last entry was partial, the writing hurried. 23 Wabantine, not what they said. Compound is wrong, American construction, need to warn. The rest was illegible, the page stained and torn. Mitchell slipped the notebook into his pocket, knowing he should log it as evidence, but something in his gut telling him to wait. "Recovery complete," he reported into his radio. "Ready for extraction." As the helicopter descended through the canopy, Mitchell looked back at the clearing. The jungle was already beginning to reclaim the site, erasing what little evidence remained of whatever horror had played out here. Soon, there would be nothing left but questions. Questions he suspected no one was meant to answer. The team loaded up silently, each man lost in his own thoughts. As they lifted off, Mitchell watched the jungle spread out below them, an endless green sea hiding its secrets. Somewhere down there, 6 men had vanished without a trace. And judging by the stern faces of his superiors during the briefing, that's exactly how someone wanted it to stay. The late August heat pressed against Elena's apartment windows like a physical force, but she barely noticed. Her dining room table had become a war room, covered with printouts of news articles, military contacts, and photographs. 3 weeks had passed since the men in suits had delivered their hollow explanation, and she'd spent every free moment trying to pierce the wall of silence surrounding Mark's disappearance. The phone sat before her, a list of numbers carefully written in her precise handwriting. She'd already tried calling 6 of them, families of Mark's team members. Each attempt hit the same dead end: disconnected numbers, wrong addresses, or the occasional curt response telling her to respect their privacy. Elena picked up the receiver again, dialing the 7th number. Her fingers trembled slightly as she punched in the digits. "We're sorry, but the number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check." She slammed the phone down, frustration burning in her throat. This wasn't coincidence. Someone had systematically cut off all communication between the families. The question was, why? Elena reached for her personal address book, flipping to the back where Mark had once scribbled a number. "Just in case," he'd said, with that quiet intensity she'd come to recognize as his way of saying something important. "Frank Martinez. He's retired now, but he's solid. Trust him like you'd trust me." Her hand hovered over the phone. Making this call would cross a line, one the men in suits had clearly warned her not to approach. But the alternative was accepting their lies, letting Mark's disappearance be buried under paperwork and protocol. She dialed before she could change her mind. The phone rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Martinez?" "Mr. Martinez? This is Elena Draven, Mark's wife." The silence that followed lasted several heartbeats. When Martinez spoke again, his voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. "Inside line?" "No, personal phone. Give me 30 minutes, I'll come to you." The line went dead before she could respond. Elena sat back, her heart pounding. Something in Martinez's tone, that immediate shift to caution, confirmed her worst fears. This wasn't just about a training accident. The next 28 minutes crawled by. Elena paced her small apartment, checking windows, noting cars that passed too slowly on the street below. The knock, when it came, was soft but decisive. Frank Martinez was shorter than she'd expected, with the compact build of a retired athlete and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings. He stepped inside without a word, did a quick sweep of her apartment, then finally settled at her kitchen table. "You've been making calls," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena nodded. "No one will talk to me. The other families are being protected," Martinez cut in. "Same as you should be. You need to stop digging, Elena." "Protected from what?" "They told me it was a training exercise." Martinez's laugh was bitter. "Is that what they're calling it?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite being inside. Mark and his team were in Venezuela, Operation Scorpion Veil. It was supposed to be a simple recon of a suspected weapons facility, but something went wrong. Very wrong. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know this?" "Because I helped plan the initial insertion route, before they changed everything at the last minute, moved up the timeline, altered the extraction coordinates." Martinez's weathered face was grim. Mark knew something was off. He tried to get word up the chain, but by then it was too late. Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Why are they lying about it if something happened?" "Because officially we were never there. Venezuela's got enough problems with American intervention in their affairs. A SEAL team operating on their soil? That's an international incident waiting to happen." He paused, studying her face. "But that's not the real reason they're burying this." "What is?" Martinez shook his head. "Don't ask questions you don't want answered. People who've pushed too hard on this, good people, connected people, they have a way of dropping off the grid. No warnings, no bodies, just gone." The weight of his words settled over the kitchen like a shroud. Elena thought of the envelope Mark had given her, still sealed, hidden in her dresser drawer. "Mark left something with you, didn't he?" Martinez asked quietly. "Before he shipped out?" Elena's sharp look was answer enough. "Destroy it," he said. "Whatever it is, whatever he wrote, burn it. Now. Don't read it. Don't make copies. Make it disappear." "But, Elena." Martinez reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. "Mark was my friend. He saved my life twice in Panama. Whatever he put in that envelope, It's not worth your life. And if they think you have it, that's exactly what it'll cost you. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. They're never going to tell me what really happened to him, are they? Martinez stood, his expression heavy with regret. Some truths stay buried in the jungle, for everyone's sake. He moved to the door, then paused. I'm retiring to Arizona next week, going off the grid. Don't try to contact me again. After he left, Elena sat in her darkening apartment for a long time. Finally, she moved to her bedroom, retrieved the envelope from its hiding place. Mark's handwriting on the front, her name, nothing else, seemed to accuse her of betrayal. I'm sorry, she whispered, striking a match. She held the envelope over her kitchen sink, watching as the flame caught the corner. The fire spread quickly, consuming Mark's last words to her in seconds. She let the ashes swirl down the drain, taking with them whatever truth her husband had tried to share. That night, Elena lay awake, staring at her ceiling. The smell of burned paper lingered in her apartment like a ghost. She'd done what Martinez advised, protected herself as Mark would have wanted. But as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep, one thought haunted her. What truth was worth erasing 11 men from history? In the weeks that followed, Elena would learn to live with the official story. She would nod when people offered condolences about the training accident. She would file the appropriate paperwork, accept the folded flag, move forward with her life. But she would never forget the look in Martinez's eyes, the look of a man who knew exactly what kind of darkness could swallow good men whole and leave no trace behind. August 1987 brought a suffocating heat to Virginia Beach. Elena sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of letters and documents, each one representing another dead end. The morning light filtered through dusty blinds, illuminating the official Pentagon letterhead that had arrived moments ago. She read it again, her hands shaking. Status update. Chief Petty Officer Mark A. Draven. After thorough investigation, this case is hereby classified as administrative absence without leave, AWOL. All benefits and privileges are suspended pending resolution. The words blurred before her eyes. AWOL. The ultimate insult to a man who'd given everything to his country. Mark, who'd never missed a muster in 15 years of service, who'd earned 3 Purple Hearts, who wrote her detailed notes when he'd be late for dinner. They were calling him a deserter. Elena stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum. She moved to the window, watching the neighbors go about their morning routines. How could everything look so normal when her world had completely unraveled? The phone rang, startling her. She reached for it with practiced caution, having learned to expect disappointment. Mrs. Draven? A woman's clipped tone. This is Patricia Morton from the Benefits Administration Office. I'm calling to inform you that your base housing allowance will be terminated effective end of month. Elena pressed her fingers to her temple. On what grounds? Your husband's change in status to AWOL invalidates all dependent benefits. You should have received official notification. I received nothing official about anything, Elena cut in, her voice sharp. No death certificate, no personal effects, not even a flag. Just a form letter calling my husband a deserter. A pause on the line. I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm only handling the housing portion. If you have concerns about the status determination, you'll need to contact the Pentagon, Senator Warner's office, the Navy Family Services. Elena's laugh was bitter. I've tried them all. Nobody will even acknowledge receiving my letters. I understand this is difficult. No, you don't understand. Elena's grip tightened on the receiver. My husband and 10 other men vanished during a classified operation. Now they're being erased like they never existed. How is that possible in the United States of America? The line went dead. Elena set the phone down carefully, though every muscle in her body screamed to slam it. She'd learned to control such impulses over the past month. Anger wouldn't bring Mark back. It wouldn't get her answers. She returned to the kitchen table, to her methodically organized piles of correspondence. 27 letters to various senators, including 3 to Warner of Virginia. 15 to major newspapers, 12 to military advocacy groups. The responses, when they came at all, were maddeningly identical. Polite dismissals, recommendations to follow proper channels, suggestions that she seek grief counseling. A knock at the door, interrupted her thoughts. Elena tensed. Unexpected visitors rarely brought good news these days. Through the peephole, she saw a young postal worker holding a large manila envelope. Certified mail for Elena Vega Draven, he announced when she opened the door. Need your signature. The return address was the Department of the Navy. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed for it, thanked the carrier, and retreated inside. The envelope contained Mark's service record, or what remained of it. Entire pages had been redacted, black lines obscuring missions, dates, locations. His final fitness report was missing entirely. At the bottom, a sticky note. Per your FOIA request. Elena spread the documents across her table, searching for any hint of Operation Scorpion Veil. Nothing. According to these papers, Mark's service had ended in June, before the mission ever happened. They weren't just bearing the truth, they were rewriting history. She glanced at the clock. 2 hours until her shift at the base library, where she still worked as a civilian contractor. They hadn't taken that from her yet, though she suspected it was only a matter of time. Moving to the bedroom, Elena opened the closet where Mark's uniform still hung. She ran her fingers over the crisp fabric, the ribbons and insignia that told the story of his service, the visible parts at least. So much of what he'd done would never appear on any uniform. With careful movements, she began removing the hangers. One by one, she laid each uniform on the bed, smoothing wrinkles, straightening pins. When she finished, she retrieved the cedar chest from under the bed, her grandmother's hope chest, ironically enough. The uniforms fit perfectly inside. Elena added Mark's spare boots, his cover, the photo albums she'd compiled of his graduation from Buds, and their small wedding ceremony. On top, she placed the letter declaring him AWOL. I won't let them erase you, she whispered, closing the lid. I won't let them turn you into a ghost. She spent the next hour writing letters. More letters to more senators, to different newspapers, to anyone who might listen. Each one laid out the facts as she knew them. 11 men missing, a classified mission denied, families stonewalled, records altered. The pile of outgoing mail grew beside her. She knew most would go unanswered. Some might be intercepted before reaching their destinations, but she kept writing. Each letter was a tiny act of defiance, a refusal to accept the official lies. When she finally stood to prepare for work, her hand was cramping from writing. She gathered the letters, would mail them from different post offices over the next few days. Small precautions, probably futile, but necessary. In the bathroom mirror, Elena straightened her collar, applied lipstick with military precision. She would go to work. She would smile at her co-workers. She would maintain her security clearance and her access to the base. She would appear to accept the unacceptable, but she would never stop searching for the truth. Before leaving, she paused at the cedar chest. Her hand rested on its smooth surface, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath her palm. I promise, she whispered to the uniforms inside, to the man who had worn them with such pride. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll find out what happened to you. To all of you. She locked the door behind her, heading for another day of pretending normalcy while carrying the weight of an impossible truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the base housing complex, shadows that seemed to reach for her like grasping fingers, trying to pull her into the same darkness that had swallowed her husband. Elena walked straight through them, head high, letters secure in her bag. They could take Mark's benefits, erase his records, deny his service, but they couldn't take her determination to uncover the truth, not as long as she drew breath. The shadows followed her all the way to the base library, where shelves of books stood in neat rows, each one catalogued, numbered, accounted for. Unlike her husband, who had become a missing page in a classified story, a story she intended to read in full, no matter the cost. The Bell's Diner sign flickered in the gray November drizzle, its neon casting intermittent red shadows across Elena's face as she sat in her usual corner booth. 2 years of dead ends had taught her to choose seats with clear views of both exits. The coffee had grown cold, untouched since her third refill. At precisely 2:15 p.m., a man in a weathered raincoat entered, shaking water from a plain black umbrella. Mid-60s, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of unremarkable face that disappeared in crowds. He scanned the diner methodically before meeting her eyes with a slight nod. Mrs. Vega Draven? His voice was soft, measured. Thank you for meeting me. Elena gestured to the seat across from her. Mr. Reynolds, I presume? That'll do. He settled into the vinyl booth, placing his briefcase beside him. A waitress approached, but he waved her away with a practiced smile. Your letter mentioned Mark. Elena kept her voice steady, though her hands tightened around the coffee cup. You said you had information about the mission. Reynolds glanced around the nearly empty diner. A truck driver dozed over apple pie at the counter. Two elderly women chatted over lunch by the window. The waitress had disappeared into the kitchen. I spent 32 years at Fort Meade, he began, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to wipe his glasses. Signal intelligence primarily, but in '87, I was temporarily assigned to a special projects division analyzing field communications from South America. Elena felt her pulse quicken but maintained her composed expression. Go on. On July 18, 1987, at approximately 0300 hours, we intercepted a burst transmission from a location near the Venezuelan-Colombian border, heavily encrypted, using a protocol reserved for top-priority SEAL operations. He replaced his glasses carefully. The transmission lasted 12 seconds before being cut off. Within minutes, all our monitoring equipment went dark. The morning Mark disappeared, Elena whispered. Reynolds nodded. By noon, every trace of that transmission had been purged from our systems. When I tried to access the logs, I found them sealed under Presidential Directive 313E. That's a classification level I'd never encountered in 3 decades of service. The truck driver paid his bill and left, bell chiming above the door. Rain drummed steadily against the windows. Operation Scorpion Veil, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Reynolds's eyes sharpened behind his glasses. That name never appeared in any official document I saw. But yes, that was the mission designation used in the encrypted header. He leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Draven, you need to understand something. This wasn't a standard black op. The level of classification, the speed of the cover-up. I've only seen that kind of response once before during the Cuba crisis. Whatever your husband's team encountered out there, someone very powerful wanted it buried. Elena pulled a small notebook from her purse, years of investigation reflected in its dog-eared pages. I've written to every senator, every newspaper. Stop. Reynolds's tone was gentle but firm. Those letters are being intercepted. Your phone is almost certainly tapped. The only reason we're having this conversation is that I'm officially retired and very careful about my movements. Then why risk meeting me at all? He was silent for a moment, studying her face. Because I knew some of the men on that team. Good men. And because what happened to them, what's still happening to their families, it isn't right. Reynolds reached for his briefcase, movements deliberately casual. He withdrew what appeared to be a manila folder filled with retirement paperwork. But as he slid it across the table, Elena glimpsed the edge of a topographical map tucked between the sheets. I can't tell you everything I know, he said quietly, but I can point you in the right direction. That map shows the team's last known position, cross-referenced with local geographical surveys and satellite imagery from '87. The coordinates are in the margin. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she accepted the folder. Why now? After 2 years? Because things are shifting in Washington. Files are being moved, records altered retroactively. Someone's trying to make sure this story stays buried forever. He stood, retrieving his umbrella. Be careful who you trust, Mrs. Draven. And whatever you do, don't try to go there yourself. The jungle isn't what killed those men. Before she could respond, he was moving toward the door, just another elderly man leaving a diner on a rainy afternoon. The bell chimed once, and he was gone. Elena waited 15 minutes, nursing her. Cold coffee before leaving. She drove a circuitous route home, watching for tails, parking 3 blocks away and walking through the rain. Standard precautions now, as automatic as breathing. In her basement office, she cleared a space on the wall between filing cabinets crammed with dead-end leads and denied FOIA requests. The map, carefully extracted from its concealing documents, showed a section of dense jungle near the Orinoco River. A red circle marked a location deep in the interior, with coordinates precisely noted in faded ink. She pinned it carefully, stepping back to study the terrain. Rivers like veins, contour lines suggesting steep ridges, vast stretches marked simply as unexplored. Somewhere in that green maze, 11 men had vanished without a trace. Moving to her desk, Elena opened the bottom drawer and withdrew a photograph she'd looked at countless times. 11 men in combat gear, posed casually before a transport plane. Mark stood third from the left, his familiar half-smile visible despite the poor quality of the print. She knew every face by heart now, had memorized their names, their service records, the lies told to their families. The photograph was beginning to yellow slightly at the edges, but the men remained unchanged, forever caught in that moment before everything went wrong. Elena pinned it beside the map, connecting the past to its hidden location with a red thread. "I'm getting closer," she whispered to the faces that had become her constant companions. "Whatever they're hiding, wherever you are, I'm going to find out." The basement was silent except for the distant patter of rain and the soft whir of a dehumidifier. Files lined the walls, each containing a piece of the puzzle. Mission logs, weather reports, shipping manifests, personnel transfers. 2 years of careful collection, cross-referencing, analysis. And now, finally, a map. A real location to replace the void where 11 men had been erased from history. Elena sat at her desk, beneath the watchful eyes of the photograph, and began to make notes. Reynolds had given her more than coordinates. He'd given her confirmation that Operation Scorpion Veil was real, that the cover-up went to the highest levels of government. She opened a fresh file folder, labeled it with the current date, and began methodically documenting everything Reynolds had said. Every detail mattered. Every connection could be the one that finally revealed the truth. The photograph watched silently from the wall as she worked, 11 men forever poised on the edge of their final mission, waiting for someone to tell their story. The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the mist when Jorge Mendoza's reforestation team reached the fallen ceiba tree. Ancient and massive, its root system had finally given way during last season's floods, creating a crater where earth and history mingled. "Mira esto!" called out Carlos, the youngest member of the crew, pointing his machete towards something glinting beneath the exposed roots. The early light caught an edge of metal, out of place among the organic tangle. Jorge moved closer, his boots sinking into the still damp soil. 30 years of working in the Amazonas state forests had taught him to be cautious. What looked like treasure often turned out to be trash. Old mining equipment, crashed drug planes, the detritus of decades of human intrusion into the jungle. "Careful," he warned, but Carlos was already reaching into the gap between 2 massive roots. The younger man's fingers closed around something solid, and with a grunt, he pulled. The object came free with a wet sucking sound, bringing clumps of dark earth with it. Jorge's breath caught. Not mining gear, not plane parts. A military helmet, its surface dulled by years of exposure but unmistakably American in design. "Military," Jorge said, taking it from Carlos's hands. He turned it over carefully. Despite the corrosion, he could make out faded numbers stamped into the interior band. The outside bore scratches that might once have been camouflage paint. But what caught his attention was a strange protrusion on the right side, some kind of mechanical attachment sealed behind clouded plastic. Carlos wiped mud from the helmet's surface with his sleeve. "There's more here," he said, pointing to where the root ball had torn free. Metal fragments glinted in the exposed earth, shell casings, the remains of what might have been a radio, pieces of equipment Jorge couldn't identify. "Mark this location," Jorge ordered, pulling out his GPS unit. The coordinates placed them roughly 60 kilometers from the Colombian border, deep in territory that had seen its share of violence over the decades. He'd heard stories of military operations in these parts during the late 80s. Guerrillas, drug runners, darker things whispered about in village bars. The helmet felt heavy in his hands, its presence raising uncomfortable questions. American military gear, this deep in Venezuelan territory? He wrapped it carefully in his spare shirt and stored it in his pack. "We report this?" Carlos asked, already knowing the answer. Jorge shook his head. "Official channels will just make it disappear. I know someone who should see this first." Miguel Herrera's shop in Ciudad Bolivar looked more like a museum storage room than a business. Glass cases housed pre-Columbian pottery alongside colonial coins. Tribal masks watched from the walls. But Miguel's real expertise lay in more recent artifacts, the physical evidence of South America's shadowy conflicts. The bell above the door chimed as Jorge entered, carrying his wrapped bundle. Miguel looked up from his workbench where he'd been examining what appeared to be a Vietnam-era dog tag. "Jorge, what brings you from the forest?" Miguel's smile faded as he saw his friend's expression. "You found something." Jorge placed the bundle on the counter and carefully unwrapped it. Miguel's breath hitched. His hands, weathered but steady, reached for the helmet with the reverence of a true collector. "American," he muttered, turning it under his desk lamp. Navy SEAL, late 1980s model. The mount is interesting, not standard issue. His fingers traced the device attached to the helmet's side. This is prototype equipment, very advanced for the period. Can you tell what it is? Miguel adjusted his glasses, peering closer at the sealed unit. Early helmet-mounted camera system, experimental stuff. The SEALs were testing them for after-action analysis. He pointed to a barely visible serial number beneath the crud. This dates to 1987, maybe early 88. Jorge shifted uncomfortably. What would American Special Forces be doing here back then? Nothing officially. Miguel's tone was grim. But there were rumors, operations that never happened, men who never existed. He reached beneath his counter and produced a small toolkit. The real question is, did they record anything? For the next hour, Miguel worked carefully, cleaning decades of corrosion from the camera housing. Jorge watched as his friend's expert hands revealed more details. Manufacturer's marks, calibration points, a power input port barely bigger than a pinhead. Remarkable preservation, Miguel murmured. The seals held. Internal components might still be intact. He connected a specially modified power supply, adjusting the voltage carefully. These units stored data on solid-state memory, very advanced for the time. If there's anything left... A tiny red light flickered to life on the camera housing. Both men held their breath. Miguel reached for a cable connecting the unit to an ancient CRT monitor he kept for reviewing old footage. Static filled the screen, then cleared partially. Fragments of images appeared. Jungle canopy, filtered sunlight, the blur of movement. The footage was degraded, but portions remained viewable. A timestamp flickered in one corner. 07/18/1987. Wait! Miguel said suddenly, freezing the playback. He pointed to a figure partially visible in frame, specifically to the name tape on his combat vest. The letters were faded but legible. Draven, Mother of God, Miguel whispered. He turned to his computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. I knew I remembered something about this. He pulled up a scanned document, a list of missing service members from the late 1980s. Here, Chief Petty Officer Mark Draven, Navy SEAL, disappeared during a training exercise in July 1987. But this footage... He gestured to the screen. This is no training exercise. This is combat footage from inside Venezuela. Jorge stared at the frozen image, at the name that had waited 36 years to be found. What do we do with this? Miguel was already reaching for his phone. I know someone at the University of Texas. They have a military archives department. This needs to be properly preserved, analyzed. He paused, hand hovering over the keypad. This isn't just a lost helmet, Jorge. This is evidence. Whatever happened to these men, whoever covered it up, this camera might tell the story they tried to bury. The helmet sat between them on the counter, its secrets partially revealed but mostly still locked away in corrupted memory. Through the shop's windows, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor, while somewhere in the jungle, a fallen ceiba tree marked the spot where history had finally begun to surface. The camera's red light continued to blink steadily, like a pulse restored after decades of silence, waiting to tell its story. Miguel Herrera's conscience battled with his collector's instincts for 3 days before money won. The helmet and its precious footage changed hands in a dimly lit cafe in Caracas, passed across a sticky table to Anton Kovac, a Croatian artifact dealer known for his extensive private collection of military memorabilia. $40,000, Kovac said, sliding an envelope across the table. Plus 10% if anything interesting develops. His accent carried the polish of European education, at odds with his worn cargo pants and tactical vest. Miguel nodded, trying not to think about the historical value being lost to private hands. The camera still works, memories degraded, but I know my business, Kovac interrupted, already wrapping the helmet in protective cloth. You'll see it soon enough. Everything finds its way to the internet eventually. 2 weeks later, a grainy 12-second clip appeared on a military history forum. The post title read simply, SEAL Team Mission, Venezuela, 1987. The footage showed dense jungle canopy, then panned down to reveal armed men in period-correct Navy SEAL gear moving in formation. The timestamp matched the date of Operation Scorpion Veil. In Arlington, Virginia, technical archivist James Morton nearly spilled his coffee across his keyboard. He leaned closer to his monitor, squinting at the distinctive camera angle and quality. The footage had the exact visual signature he'd spent years studying, the experimental heads-up combat recording system, a classified program he'd helped document for the Naval Historical Center. "Holy shit," he whispered, hitting pause on a frame showing the helmet-mounted camera's unique lens arrangement. Only 36 units were ever produced. All were supposedly destroyed or lost during field trials. Morton's fingers flew across his keyboard, downloading the clip before it could vanish. He'd seen enough leaked footage to know what was authentic. The video's imperfections, its degraded edges, the way the timestamp flickered, couldn't be faked. This was genuine heads-up footage, which meant... He reached for his phone, scrolling to a contact he hadn't used in months. Sam Riddell answered on the third ring. "Whatever it is, I'm on deadline," the podcast host's gravelly voice warned. "Sam, remember that SEAL team disappearance you were asking? About last year? The classified op in South America?" A pause. Papers shuffled in the background. "Operation Scorpion Vale, July '87. Why?" "Someone just posted helmet cam footage. It's authentic. I'd stake my career on it." The line went silent for several seconds. When Sam spoke again, his voice had lost its irritation. "Send me everything. And James, don't tell anyone else." Over the next week, Sam's production team worked with Morton to clean up the footage. Modern enhancement techniques revealed details lost to decades of decay. More clips appeared online, brief fragments showing the SEAL team moving through the jungle, setting up observation posts, checking equipment. But the most important segment emerged last. The timestamp showed 02:14 hours, July 19th, 1987. Night vision gave everything a ghostly green tinge. The camera, worn by Chief Petty Officer Draven, captured his team approaching a clearing. Instead of the expected rebel compound, they found something else entirely. A modern facility with American construction markers. Military-grade security fencing. English language warning signs. "What the hell?" a voice whispered off camera. "Those are our buildings." "Command, this is Scorpion Lead." Draven's voice was tight with controlled tension. "We have eyes on the target. Something's wrong. These are U.S. installations, not..." The footage cut out in a burst of static. Sam Riddell sat in his studio replaying the clip for the dozenth time. 20 years of investigating military cover-ups had taught him to trust his instincts. This wasn't just another lost patrol story. This was something darker, American Special Forces stumbling onto something they weren't supposed to find. He looked at the wall of evidence his team had assembled. Satellite photos from 1987 showing a mysterious facility near the mission coordinates. Redacted Senate committee transcripts discussing unauthorized research installations in South America. A list of 11 SEALs who vanished without explanation. And at the center, a photograph of Chief Petty Officer Mark Draven, taken just months before his disappearance. His eyes seemed to stare directly at Sam, demanding truth after 36 years of silence. "Run it," Sam told his producer. "Full episode, everything we have." The podcast aired on a Tuesday morning. By noon, it had crashed their servers. Veterans groups shared it thousands of times. Military forums exploded with analysis of the footage. News organizations began making calls. In a small house in Virginia Beach, Elena Vega Draven's phone rang just after sunset. She almost didn't answer. At 62, she'd grown tired of reporters dredging up the past. But something made her pick up. "Mrs. Vega Draven?" The man's voice was respectful, professional. "My name is Sam Riddell. I host a podcast called The Fighting Truth. We've uncovered some footage of your husband's last mission." Elena's hand tightened on the receiver. For decades, she'd imagined this call, practiced what she'd say. Now the words stuck in her throat. "We'd like to show you what we found," Sam continued gently. "And we need your help to understand it." She looked at the wall where Mark's service photo still hung, unchanged since 1987. His eyes seemed different now, not accusatory but determined, like they'd been that last morning when he'd handed her the envelope she'd been too afraid to open. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "It's time." The next morning, Elena sat in Sam's studio watching the enhanced footage on a large screen. She didn't speak as the familiar shapes of jungle gave way to that mysterious compound. Didn't react when she heard her husband's voice for the first time in 36 years. Only when the static consumed the final frames did she allow herself a single sharp intake of breath. He knew, she said quietly. Before he left, Mark knew something was wrong. He tried to warn me. Sam nodded, sliding a folder across the table. We found these in declassified files. Construction orders for a research facility near the mission coordinates, approved by people who shouldn't have had authority in that region. Elena opened the folder with steady hands. After decades of hunting shadows, real evidence felt almost foreign. They told me he went AWOL during training, that he'd abandoned his duty. Her voice carried no bitterness, only cold certainty. They erased him because he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. The footage proves he was there on a sanctioned mission, Sam said. Whatever happened next, your husband didn't desert. He was serving his country. Elena touched the screen where Mark's name tag had been visible, sharp and clear in the enhanced frame. Show me everything, she said. Every fragment, every detail. I've waited 36 years. I can finally tell his story. Elena sat in Sam Riddell's climate-controlled studio, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The restored footage played on 3 high-definition monitors, each showing a different enhancement of the same haunting sequence. The timestamp read 02:27 hours, July 19, 1987. We've cleaned up the audio as much as possible, Sam explained, his voice gentle. The helmet cam's microphone was surprisingly advanced for its time. Through the green haze of night vision, the camera, mounted on Mark's helmet, showed a tactical formation moving through dense undergrowth. The footage quality was grainy but stable, each frame capturing the methodical advance of highly trained operators. That's Paul Riggs on point, Elena said, indicating the lead figure. Her voice remained steady, though her knuckles had gone white. Mark's second in command. The team reached the edge of the clearing they'd discovered earlier. The American-built compound stood dark and silent, its security lights conspicuously disabled. Mark's camera panned slowly, documenting every detail. The reinforced gates, the communications array, the unmarked helicopters on the landing pad. Hold position. Mark's whispered command came through with startling clarity. Something's off. Those birds are prepped for immediate dust-off. Elena leaned forward as her husband's voice filled the room. 36 years vanished in an instant. She could picture him exactly as he'd been, calm, focused, processing the wrongness of what lay before them. The camera shifted as Mark reached for his radio. Command, this is Scorpion Lead. We have an irregular situation. Request immediate. Static burst through the speakers. In the same instant, powerful spotlights blazed to life, flooding the clearing with harsh white light. The night vision went blank. Switch to backup! Mark's voice cut through the chaos. The footage flickered, then stabilized as the camera adjusted. What it revealed made Elena's breath catch. Figures were emerging from the tree line behind them, American operators in full tactical gear. Their weapons were already raised. Contact rear! Someone shouted. There are... The first shots cracked through the jungle night. On screen, Riggs spun and fell, his rifle unfired. More shots followed, precise, professional. Not the wild spray of rebels, but the disciplined fire of trained killers. Mark's camera swung wildly as he dove for cover. Break contact! Break con... Another burst of gunfire cut him off. The footage showed glimpses of his team scattered, caught in a perfect crossfire. Some tried to return fire. Others never had the chance. Then Mark was running, crashing through the underbrush. His breathing came in controlled bursts despite the pace. The camera caught fragments of the pursuit. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, voices calling out in English, boots pounding through the leaf litter. He paused behind a massive tree, and for a moment the image steadied. Mark turned his head slightly, speaking directly to the camera in a whisper that carried decades of damning truth. We were never meant to come back. The footage continued for another 40 seconds. Running, more gunfire, a final desperate scramble up a steep embankment. Then the screen went black. Silence filled the studio. Sam's technical team sat motionless at their stations. Elena remained perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the dark monitors. Play it again, she said finally, frame by frame this time. For the next 6 hours, they dissected every second of footage. Sam's forensic video analyst, Dr. Sarah Chen, pointed out crucial details they'd missed in real time. Look at their gear, she said, freezing on a frame showing one of the attackers. That's SEAL equipment, not standard issue. It's the exact same experimental loadout your husband's team was testing. They knew the mission parameters, Sam added, knew exactly where to set up the ambush. Elena pulled out the worn map she'd received in 1989, spreading it carefully on the desk. The analyst team gathered around as she pointed to the circled location. The NSA source who gave me this said it was where the operation went wrong, she said. I spent years trying to reach it, but the coordinates were deep in restricted territory. Dr. Chen pulled up satellite imagery of the area from 1987, then overlaid the footage's geographical markers. The match was perfect, down to the distinctive curve of the river and the elevated ridge where Mark made his final run. This wasn't an ambush by hostile forces, Sam said quietly. The angles of fire, the positioning, the timing with the radio interference, this was a planned execution. They knew what was in that compound. Elena's voice had gone cold. They knew Mark would recognize it wasn't a rebel site, so they made sure no one would ever report back. Dr. Chen highlighted another detail, a partial glimpse through one of the compound's windows just before the ambush. The freeze frame revealed rows of hospital beds and medical equipment. Whatever this facility was, she said, someone wanted it kept secret badly enough to kill 11 of their own men. Elena touched the screen where Mark's final warning hung frozen in time. He knew, she whispered. That's why he gave me the envelope that morning. He sensed something was wrong with the mission. The envelope you burned? Sam asked gently. She nodded, the old guilt visible in her eyes. I was afraid. They were watching me so closely after he disappeared, but Mark... She straightened in her chair. Mark tried to stop it. He used the helmet cam to record everything, not for the mission, but for evidence. Sam's team worked through the night, pulling every scrap of data from the footage. They mapped bullet trajectories, identified equipment signatures, and analyzed audio patterns. Every detail reinforced the horrible truth. Operation Scorpion Veil hadn't failed. It had gone exactly as some hidden authority had planned. As dawn approached, Elena stood at the window of Sam's office, watching the city slowly come alive. Behind her, analysts were still hunched over screens, building the case that would finally prove what she'd known in her heart for 36 years. They made him disappear twice, she said, her reflection steel hard in the glass. First his life, then his name. They buried the truth under papers and protocols and lies. She turned to face Sam. But Mark left us this. He made sure the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Sam nodded, looking at the stack of evidence they'd compiled. The footage proves it wasn't rebels, wasn't an accident, wasn't desertion. Your husband and his team were murdered by American forces on a secret mission to protect something in that compound. And now we know exactly where it happened, Elena said, her finger resting on the map that had waited so long to be understood. The match was undeniable. Every landmark, every contour line, exactly as the mysterious NSA analyst had marked it decades ago. Ego. In the soft morning light, Elena studied the coordinates that marked where her husband had made his last stand. For 36 years, she'd imagined countless scenarios about what had happened in that jungle. Now she knew. The truth was worse than any of her darkest theories, but at least it was finally, undeniably real. The fluorescent lights hummed in the small recording booth as Sam adjusted his microphone. Across from him sat a man in his 70s, thin and weathered, with eyes that hadn't lost their careful vigilance. He'd insisted on being backlit, his face in shadow. For the record, Sam began, you served as a CIA logistics officer from 1975 to 1992, correct? That's right. The voice was gravelly, measured. Senior Operations Support, Special Activities Division. I handled supply chains for what we called deniable installations across Latin America. Elena watched through the control room window, her hands clasped tight. The man had reached out after their podcast aired the helmet footage, using encrypted channels and demanding anonymity, but his credentials checked out. And you're familiar with Operation Scorpion Veil? Familiar enough to know it wasn't what the records claim. He leaned forward slightly. Those SEALs weren't sent to extract a scientist. They were sent to clean up evidence of something much worse. Sam glanced at his notes. You mentioned echo compounds in your initial contact. What exactly were they? The man was silent for a moment, choosing his words. During the Cold War, we had a network of black sites, unofficial facilities operating under complete deniability. Most were for detention, interrogation. But the echo compounds, they were different. Different how? They were laboratories. His voice had gone flat. Testing sites for experimental programs that couldn't risk oversight. The kind of research that needed to stay off books completely. Through the glass, Elena saw Sam's producer signaling. Their source's heart rate monitor was spiking. Whatever he was about to reveal clearly still haunted him. The compound your SEALs found was Echo 3, he continued. Originally built in '82 as a medical research station, officially tracking tropical diseases, but by '86 it had gone dark. No official budget, no oversight, just unmarked helicopters and weekly supply drops. What changed? New management. A group within the agency started running unauthorized human trials. Political prisoners, mostly. Testing experimental compounds, studying exposure effects. He paused. Things that violated every international law on the books. Sam leaned in. And Chief Draven's team discovered this? They weren't supposed to. The mission brief said they were confirming intel about a Venezuelan nuclear program. Pure fiction. But someone higher up got nervous about Echo 3. Wanted it sanitized, evidence destroyed. They needed a SEAL team that could handle the wet work quietly. But Draven recognized something was wrong, Sam prompted. Of course he did. Man had combat experience in 3 continents. The moment they saw American equipment, Western medical gear, they knew it wasn't a rebel camp. The source shifted in his chair. And that's when the backup team moved in. The ones who ambushed them? CIA Tactical Unit. They'd been shadowing Draven's team from insertion, waiting until they reached the compound. Perfect kill zone, high ground on 3 sides, clear fields of fire, professional work. Elena felt her throat tighten. The clinical way he described her husband's murder made her hands shake. We have footage showing American operators, Sam said, using SEAL equipment. Standard protocol for deniable ops. If anything went wrong, evidence would point to a rebel attack, not friendly fire. Echo compounds didn't exist on paper, and neither did the teams that protected them. How many other sites were there? The source straightened. That's not something I'll discuss, but Echo 3 wasn't unique. The whole program was built on deniability. If exposure threatened security, assets were eliminated, even American ones. You mean murdered? Sam's voice had an edge. I mean whatever term lets you sleep at night. The man's tone was bitter. I coordinated supply lines, arranged transport, never asked questions about the cargo or the screams from the medical wings. That was the job. Keep the machine running. Don't look too close. But you're looking now. Why come forward after all these years? There was a long pause. When the source spoke again, his voice had lost its professional distance. Because I helped kill those men. Not with a gun, but with manifests and requisition forms. I approved the equipment for both teams. Draven's unit and the cleanup crew. Arranged the transport that got them in country. His hands were trembling slightly. For 36 years I've carried that. Watched them erase good men to protect monsters. Elena pressed her palm against the glass, studying the shadowed figure. Here was someone who had helped orchestrate Mark's death, finally speaking truth to power. The helmet footage went public, he continued. Can't stuff that back in the box. People need to know what really happened. Why those SEALs died. The kind of secrets we buried in places like Echo 3. And what exactly were those secrets? Sam asked quietly. Medical experiments. Behavioral modification. Testing limits of human endurance and psychological breaking points. The kind of research that makes Unit 731 look tame. He took a shaking breath. We told ourselves it was necessary, that someone had to do the dirty work to keep America safe. But in those compounds, we became what we claimed to be fighting. The control room was dead silent. Elena felt cold sweat on her neck as the implications sank in. Mark hadn't just stumbled onto a secret facility. He'd discovered an American atrocity. Chief Draven tried to abort the mission, Sam said. Called for extraction when he realized what they'd found. And got a bullet instead of a helicopter, standard protocol for compromised assets. The source's voice had grown hoarse. The agency couldn't risk exposure. 11 SEALs died because they saw something they weren't supposed to. Then we buried them twice. Once in the jungle, once in paperwork. You have documentation? Had. Most records were destroyed in '92 during the program shutdown, but I kept insurance. He slid a thin flash drive across the table. Transportation logs, supply manifests, enough to prove Echo 3 existed and what happened there. The rest... He shrugged. That died with the SEALs. Sam studied the drive. Why give this to us now? Because that helmet footage shows the truth we tried to hide. Your Chief Draven made sure of that. Least I can do is confirm what he died trying to expose. The source stood slowly. Maybe then his wife can finally get the answers she deserves. Through the glass, Elena watched him gather his coat. Before he reached the door, he turned back. One more thing. That compound where they died, it wasn't just testing facilities. Under the medical wings, there was a mass grave, hundreds of bodies, test subjects who didn't survive the programs. His voice cracked slightly. Your husband and his team were buried with them. Unmarked graves for unmarked victims. That's what Echo 3 was. A place where people disappeared completely. The door clicked shut behind him. In the control room, Elena sank into a chair, her legs unsteady. 3 decades of questions finally had answers, each one worse than her darkest fears. Sam found her there an hour later, still processing what they'd learned. He sat quietly beside her, waiting. All these years, she finally said, I imagined so many scenarios. Rebel ambush, training accident, desertion. But this... She pressed her hands flat against the desk to stop their trembling. They murdered him for having a conscience, for refusing to be part of their atrocities. The footage proves it, Sam said gently. And now we have confirmation from inside the program itself. Your husband died trying to do the right thing. Elena stood abruptly. Take me to the memorial wall. The drive to the Naval Special Warfare Command building was silent. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the polished black granite as they approached the wall where fallen SEALs were honored. Elena had visited countless times over the years, always stopping at the blank space where Mark's name should have been. Now she understood why it was missing. Dead men got their names on walls. Disappeared men, men who threatened to expose government crimes. They got nothing, not even the dignity of acknowledged sacrifice. Her fingers traced the smooth stone, remembering Mark's last morning at home, the weight of unspoken warning in his eyes as he handed her that sealed envelope. He'd known something was wrong with the mission, known enough to try leaving evidence behind, but she'd burned that envelope, too terrified of the men watching her to read its contents. Now she'd never know what final truth Mark had tried to share. Elena's hands trembled as they moved across the blank granite. In her mind, she could still see him perfectly. Strong, principled, incapable of looking away from injustice, even when it cost him everything. 36 years of searching had finally revealed the truth. But knowledge, she was learning, didn't equal peace. Some answers only deepened the wounds they were meant to heal. The fluorescent lights of the podcast studio's research room cast a harsh glow over the scattered documents covering every surface. Sam Martinez rubbed his tired eyes, staring at the web of connections sprawled across the whiteboard. 3 days of non-stop digging had revealed a maze of shell companies, each leading to another layer of corporate obscurity. Got something, called out Katie Chen, their financial investigator. She spun her laptop around. Look at these appropriations requests from 1986. They're buried in a defense spending bill, but the language is weird. Sam leaned in, scanning the scanned document. Medical research initiatives in tropical environments, specialized containment facilities. What's the dollar amount? 47 million, routed through. Katie's fingers flew across the keyboard. Here we go. Meridian Consulting Group, which dissolved in '89. But before that, they transferred assets to Pacific Ridge Holdings, which then split into 3 separate entities in '92. Elena, who had been silently studying old photographs, looked up. The same year the source said they shut down the program. Exactly. Katie pulled up another window. Each new company had the same board chairman, retired Admiral Bryce Kearney. The name hung in the air. Sam walked to the whiteboard, marker squeaking as he wrote it down. Kearney. Wasn't he involved in Navy intelligence during the Cold War? Counterterrorism and special operations. Elena's voice was tight. Mark mentioned him once. Said he was the kind of officer who'd burn down a village to save it. Katie's typing grew more intense. After retirement, he founded Aegis Defense Solutions. They've got government contracts worth billions. Specialized training, security consulting, enhanced interrogation programs. Black site management, Sam finished grimly. Where is he now? Still CEO. Katie turned her screen again, showing a corporate headshot. A stern-faced man in his 70s stared back, silver hair perfectly groomed, eyes hard despite his practiced smile. He's giving a keynote at the Maritime Security Symposium tomorrow, downtown Norfolk. Sam studied the photo. Think he'd take questions about Echo 3? He hasn't given an unscripted interview in 20 years. Katie pulled up his public appearances. Always surrounded by security. Never speaks without pre-approved questions. Then we don't ask permission. Sam grabbed his jacket. Elena, you coming? She stood slowly, eyes still fixed on Kearney's photo. Mark would have known him, might have even taken orders directly from him. Probably signed them himself, Katie muttered, still typing. I'll keep digging. The money trail has to lead somewhere concrete. The Norfolk Marriott's grand ballroom was packed with defense contractors, military officials, and private security firms. Sam and Elena blended into the crowd, press badges prominently displayed. On stage, Admiral Kearney was finishing his speech about maritime threat assessment in the modern age. The challenges we face require innovative solutions, he said smoothly. Public-private partnerships that leverage specialized expertise while maintaining operational security. At Aegis, we're proud to support. Admiral Kearney, Sam's voice cut through the polite applause. Sam Martinez, Veterans Voice Podcast. Could you comment on Operation Scorpion Veil? The Admiral's practiced smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. I'm not familiar with that operation. Perhaps you could... Echo 3 facility, Venezuela, 1987, Sam pressed. 11 SEALs killed to protect unauthorized medical testing. Your signatures on the appropriations, sir. Security was already moving through the crowd. Kearney raised a hand, stopping them. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Martinez. One that could be considered defamatory without evidence. We have the helmet footage. Elena stepped forward. And financial records linking you to the facility through Meridian Consulting. For just a moment, Kearney's mask slipped. He stared at Elena, recognition flickering in his eyes. Mrs. Draven, your husband was a fine officer. His loss during that training exercise was tragic. It wasn't a training exercise. Elena's voice was steel. You sent him to clean up your illegal research site, then had him killed when he wouldn't go along with it. The crowd had gone silent, heads turning between the stage and the confrontation. Kearney's smile returned, colder now. Security, please escort these people out. They're clearly disturbed. He turned to the audience. My apologies for the interruption. As I was saying. Firm hands gripped Sam's shoulders. Elena shrugged off her escort, voice rising. You murdered 11 American soldiers to hide your crimes. Their blood is on your hands. Get them out of here, Kearney snapped. And call Norfolk PD. Have them charged with harassment. They were hustled through the service entrance into the back alley. The security guard's grip left bruises on Sam's arm. The Admiral's being generous, not pressing charges, the guard growled. Don't come back. Sam watched them retreat inside. Well, that was productive. Did you see his face when I mentioned Mark? Elena's hands were shaking. He knew. He remembered exactly who Mark was and what happened to him. Let's get back to the studio. Katie might have found something concrete we can use. But when they arrived, the office door was already open. Inside, chaos reigned. Filing cabinets hung open. Papers scattered across the floor. Every hard drive and backup device had been taken. Katie sat at her destroyed workstation, face pale. They got everything, she said numbly. The footage, the financial records, all our research, completely wiped from the servers. Even our cloud backups are gone. Sam surveyed the damage. When? Had to be during the symposium. They knew exactly when we'd be gone. She held up a torn photograph, the SEAL team photo Elena had provided. They were thorough, professional. Elena sank into a chair, staring at the emptied office. Just like that, all the evidence, everything we uncovered, gone? Not quite everything. Katie managed a weak smile. I kept an off-site backup of the key files, old habits from my journalism days. But they'll know that too. We need to move fast. Sam's phone buzzed. A news alert from Aegis Defense Solutions. CEO Bryce Kearney steps down for health reasons, effective immediately. He's going to ground, Sam muttered, erasing his digital footprint before we can connect him publicly to Echo 3. But why now? Elena wondered. After all these years of silence, why such a dramatic response to a few questions? Katie's fingers drummed nervously on her desk. Because we got too close. The helmet footage was bad, but survivable. They could claim it was doctored, manipulated, but the financial records, Those are harder to explain away, especially with a whistleblower corroborating. A sharp crack split the air. The window behind Katie's head suddenly sprouted a perfect round hole, surrounded by a web of cracks. They dove for cover as two more shots punched through the glass. "Move!" Sam shouted, crawling toward the door. "Get to the stairs!" They scrambled out of the office as another burst of gunfire shattered the remaining windows. The stairwell echoed with their pounding footsteps as they fled down 4 flights to the parking garage. "My car!" Katie gasped, fumbling for her keys. "Quick!" They peeled out of the garage just as dark figures emerged from a black SUV. Elena glanced back, but they weren't being followed. "Just a warning," Sam said grimly, checking Katie for injuries. "They could have killed us if they wanted to. They want us scared, willing to drop the story." Katie's hands were steady on the wheel despite her pale face. Classic intimidation play. Elena stared at the office building receding behind them, thinking of another warning delivered decades ago. A sealed envelope she'd burned without reading, too frightened to learn its contents. "We can't stop," she said quietly. "Not now. Not when we're finally learning the truth." "We won't." Sam's jaw was set. "But we need to be smarter, more careful. They've shown what they're willing to do to keep this buried." Katie nodded, taking a sharp turn onto the highway. "I know somewhere we can work, off the grid, secure, but first we need to get the backup files." "Where are they?" "Safety deposit box. Different name, different bank." She checked the mirrors again. Old school, but harder to hack than the cloud. They drove in tense silence, each lost in thought. The setting sun painted Norfolk's skyline in shades of blood and shadow. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Admiral Kearney was already vanishing, erasing his digital footprint, severing connections, becoming a ghost. But he couldn't erase everything. The truth of Echo 3 was finally emerging, one piece at a time, and no amount of deleted files or intimidation could stop it now. The real question was, how many more people would die before the full story came to light? The fluorescent lights of Katie's apartment cast a harsh glow over the makeshift command center they'd established. 3 laptops hummed on her kitchen table, surrounded by empty coffee cups and takeout containers. They hadn't left the safe house in 3 days. "There," Katie said, hitting enter with finality. "The footage is live. Anonymous upload through 6 different VPNs and a blockchain-verified timestamp." Sam leaned forward, watching the upload progress bar fill. "How long before they try to take it down?" "Doesn't matter now." Katie's fingers flew across the keyboard. "I've seeded it to 30 different servers. By morning, there'll be thousands of copies." Elena stood at the window, scanning the street below through a gap in the blinds. The same black sedan had circled the block 3 times in the past hour. "How many people have seen it?" "Already at 50,000 views," Sam reported, refreshing the counter. "And climbing. Veterans groups are sharing it fastest. They recognize the gear, the tactics. They know this isn't staged." The footage played silently on one of the screens. Even degraded by 36 years of jungle rot, the images were clear enough. American-made buildings in a clearing that shouldn't exist. Mark's team moving with practiced precision until the moment of recognition. The firefight. The betrayal. "Look at this," Katie said, pulling up a forum thread. #GhostOperator is trending. They're connecting dots we didn't even see. Former SEALs identifying equipment models, mission protocols. Some claiming they heard whispers about echo sites back in the 80s but could never prove anything. Elena moved to read over her shoulder. The comments scrolled past. "That's a Mark 12 MOD-1, standard issue for SEAL teams in 87. This is legit. Those buildings, saw identical construction in Panama, CIA black site. My SO served with Draven, man was a legend, no way he went AWOL." "It's working," Sam said quietly. "The truth is finally getting out." Elena's phone buzzed, an unknown number with a DC area code. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" "Mrs. Vega Draven," a woman's clipped voice. "This is Colonel Rebecca Hayes, Office of the Secretary of Defense. We need to discuss your husband's service record." Elena's hand tightened on the phone. Sam and Katie went silent, watching. "After 36 years, now you want to talk?" "Things have changed. The Secretary is convening a classified review panel regarding certain Cold War-era operations. Your testimony would be valuable." "Testimony?" Elena's laugh was bitter. "I've been trying to testify for decades. Every senator, every journalist, every military review board, they all ignored me. What's different now? A pause. The footage, Mrs. Draven. It's caused quite a stir in certain circles. Senator Martinez is pushing for a full subcommittee investigation. Into what exactly? That's classified, but if you're willing to meet, we can discuss parameters. The Pentagon Marriott tomorrow at 0900, room 713. I'll think about it. Mrs. Draven. The colonel's voice softened slightly. This is your chance to set the record straight, to give your husband the recognition he deserves. Elena ended the call, turning to the others. They want me to testify. Pentagon Review Panel. Trap? Katie asked, already typing. Maybe, but they seemed rattled. The footage is forcing their hand. Sam pulled up a news alert. Senator Martinez just announced an emergency subcommittee hearing on unauthorized military operations conducted between 1985 and 1989. It's happening, Elena. The walls are coming down. Elena watched the view counter on the footage tick higher. 60,000 now. 70. Each number representing someone learning the truth about Mark, about all of them. No more shadows. No more silence. Check this, Katie said suddenly. Someone just posted declassified supply requisitions from 87. Medical equipment shipped to training facilities in Venezuela. Way more than any normal base would need. The forum was exploding with similar posts. Retired analysts sharing redacted documents. Former operators comparing notes on mysterious deployments. Family members of other missing servicemen asking questions that had gone unanswered for decades. They can't contain it anymore, Sam said. Too many people know too much. The story's too big. Elena thought of Mark's last words on the footage. We were never meant to come back. He'd known the truth would cost him everything, but he'd chosen it anyway. Her phone buzzed again. A text this time from the same DC number. Meeting confirmed. 0900 tomorrow. Bring the original footage. Full immunity guaranteed. They're scared, Katie observed, reading over Elena's shoulder. The Pentagon doesn't offer immunity unless they know they're backed into a corner. What do you think? Elena asked Sam. He considered for a moment. Go, but not alone. And we keep a copy of everything, just in case. Already on it, Katie said, fingers flying. Creating a dead man's switch for the complete file dump. If anything happens to any of us, everything goes public. Unredacted documents, financial records, satellite imagery, all of it. Elena nodded, watching the black sedan make another pass below. The truth was like water. Once it started flowing, no amount of bureaucracy could hold it back. Mark had understood that, had died for it. Time to finish what he started, she said quietly. The view counter hit 100,000 as dawn broke over Norfolk. By sunrise, #GhostOperator was the top trending topic nationwide. Veteran groups organized virtual vigils, sharing stories of other mysterious losses, other buried truths. The black sedan finally drove away as morning traffic picked up. But Elena knew they weren't gone, just regrouping, adapting to this new reality where their secrets were spilling into the light. Sam brought fresh coffee, setting a cup by her hand. You ready for this? Elena touched the silver chain around her neck where she kept Mark's ring. He died trying to expose what happened at Echo 3. The least I can do is make sure everyone knows why. Katie looked up from her laptop, grim but determined. The footage has gone international, over 500,000 views now. CNN is running a segment tonight. Fox News has a panel of former SEALs discussing operational protocols from that era. No turning back now, Sam said. Elena watched the sun rise over the city, thinking of another morning 36 years ago when Mark had slipped her that sealed envelope. She'd burned it out of fear then, but fear couldn't silence the truth forever. The footage played on a loop on one of the screens, eternal digital ghosts moving through that fatal jungle clearing. Mark's voice preserved across decades. We were never meant to come back. But he had come back, in a way, through corrupted video files and faded documents, through forums and hashtags and viral clips, through the unstoppable flood of truth he'd died protecting. Elena gathered her files for the Pentagon meeting. It was time to tell his story, all of it. The truth about Echo 3 was finally seeing daylight, and no amount of bureaucratic shadows could hide it anymore. The Pentagon Marriott's crystal ballroom felt hollow despite its grandeur. Morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor where Elena stood ramrod straight, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun. Only 12 other people occupied the vast space, a handful of high-ranking officers, 2 congressional aides, and a Marine honor guard holding a precisely folded American flag. Admiral James Morrison, his chest heavy with decorations, approached the podium. His voice echoed in the near-empty room. "We are gathered here today to correct a grievous oversight spanning 36 years. Elena's face remained carefully neutral, though her fingers twitched slightly at her sides. She'd waited decades for this moment, imagined it countless times. Now that it was here, it felt surreal, like watching someone else's life through thick glass. Chief Petty, Officer Mark Anthony Draven served his country with distinction and honor, Morrison continued. His final mission, while details remain classified, demonstrated the highest qualities of courage, loyalty, and sacrifice that define the United States Navy SEALs. The words rang hollow against the marble walls. Elena thought of the helmet footage, of Mark's voice warning that they were never meant to return, of gunfire that came from friendly weapons. By order of the Secretary of the Navy and with the approval of Congress, we hereby posthumously award Chief Petty Officer Draven the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. The Marine Honor Guard moved with practiced precision, each step measured, each movement choreographed. The flag, folded into the traditional triangle, passed from white-gloved hands to Morrison's steady grip. He turned to Elena, his expression carefully composed. "Mrs. Vega Draven, on behalf of the President of the United States Navy, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." Elena's hands didn't shake as she accepted the weight of the folded flag. She'd dreamed of this moment through countless sleepless nights, but now it felt like another kind of betrayal, a sanitized ceremony that buried truth beneath protocol. Morrison's voice softened slightly. "We can't share everything, but we can say this: he never abandoned his duty." Elena met his gaze steadily. The question came out quiet but sharp as steel. "What else are you still hiding?" The Admiral's practiced smile flickered for just a moment. Around them, the assembled officers shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke. Morrison cleared his throat. "The medal citation, Mrs. Vega Draven." A younger officer stepped forward with a polished wooden box. Inside, the Navy Cross gleamed dully against dark velvet. Elena accepted it mechanically, her mind racing through decades of stonewalling, of denied requests, of documents that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. "Chief Draven's service record has been fully reinstated," Morrison continued. "His name will be added to the memorial wall at Naval Special Warfare Command. All previous administrative actions regarding his status have been expunged." 36 years, Elena said softly. "You could have done this 36 years ago." The silence in the room grew heavier. One of the congressional aides checked his watch discreetly. "Times were different then," Morrison offered carefully. "Many decisions were made under complex circumstances that required 11 men to disappear?" Elena's voice carried clearly across the marble floor. "That erased my husband's entire existence? That buried the truth about Echo 3? Several officers stiffened at the mention of the facility. Morrison's face hardened almost imperceptibly. "Mrs. Vega Draven, this ceremony honors your husband's sacrifice. No, Elena cut in. "This ceremony buries questions you don't want to answer. Mark deserved better. They all did." She clutched the flag closer, feeling the heavy wool against her chest. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimed 10 times. "The nation thanks you for your sacrifice," Morrison said formally, clearly eager to end the conversation. Elena looked down at the flag, at the medal in its pristine box. 36 years of waiting, and all she had were more carefully crafted lies. The ceremony concluded with stark efficiency. Elena walked alone through the hotel's vast lobby, past curious guests and busy staff. Outside, the October air bit sharp and clean. Her car sat where she'd left it, a modest sedan among government vehicles. She placed the flag and medal box carefully on the passenger seat. Her hands still didn't shake. The anger that had sustained her for decades had crystallized into something harder, colder. The drive home took 40 minutes in mid-morning traffic, Elena barely noticed the familiar streets, the changing lights, the flow of everyday life around her. Her mind kept returning to Mark's voice on that recovered footage. "We were never meant to come back." Her house looked exactly as she'd left it, a neat colonial on a quiet street in Virginia Beach. The same cream-colored walls, the same carefully tended garden. But something felt different. She noticed it as she approached the front door. A thick manila envelope propped against the welcome mat. No postmark, no return address, just her name in block letters. Elena stood very still, staring at the envelope. After a moment, she picked it up. It felt heavy, solid. Something inside shifted as she turned it over. The porch light cast long shadows across her hands as she held the unmarked envelope, weighing decades of secrets against the truth she'd fought so hard to uncover. Behind her, the flag and medal sat in her car, official recognition that answered nothing. The envelope waited, silent and heavy with promise or threat. Elena stood in the growing darkness, caught between the weight of the past and whatever revelations tomorrow might bring. Elena's hands trembled as she carried the unmarked envelope into her study. The room remained exactly as she'd left it that morning. Walls lined with filing cabinets containing 36 years of dead ends, a corkboard covered in yellowing newspaper clippings, and Mark's service photo watching over it all from behind dusty glass. She placed the envelope on her desk, next to the newly presented flag and medal box. The contrast was stark, official recognition versus anonymous delivery. Part of her wanted to call the podcast team immediately, but something held her back. This felt different, personal. The envelope's seal broke with a dry crack. Elena upended it carefully over her desk blotter. A memory chip, smaller and older than the helmet cameras, clattered onto the worn leather surface. Along with it fell a handwritten note on faded paper. What they erased after Venezuela. The chip's casing showed signs of age, corroded contacts and a hairline crack along one edge. But the military-grade storage modules were built to last. Elena's fingers brushed the worn surface, remembering the countless hours she'd spent learning about data recovery after the helmet footage emerged. Her laptop hummed to life. The chip reader, purchased specifically for analyzing the helmet data, sat ready beside it. Elena hesitated only briefly before inserting the damaged chip. The reader's indicator light flickered uncertainly, then steadied to a solid green. A single video file appeared on her screen. The timestamp read August 15, 1987, nearly 6 weeks after Mark disappeared. Elena's throat tightened. She'd memorized every date surrounding Mark's disappearance, constructed elaborate timelines trying to piece together what happened. But August 15th had never appeared in any official record. Her cursor hovered over the file. In the frame on her wall, Mark's official portrait stared back at her, forever frozen in time. Young, proud, alive. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. She clicked play. The video opened to darkness, then resolved into grainy black and white footage. The camera angle suggested security footage, mounted high in a corner. It showed a stark corridor with smooth concrete walls, institutional but deliberately anonymous. No markings, no insignia, nothing to indicate location or jurisdiction. The timestamp flickered in the corner as figures moved into frame. 2 guards in unmarked tactical gear escorted a prisoner. The man stumbled, head down, hands shackled behind his back. Even through the poor video quality, Elena recognized the set of those shoulders, the way he carried himself. "Mark," she breathed. He looked thinner than in Venezuela, his face gaunt beneath several weeks' growth of beard. But he was alive, walking, breathing. 6 weeks after they told her, he'd vanished without a trace. The guard stopped him before a heavy door. One reached for a keypad while the other maintained a firm grip on Mark's arm. The camera's angle shifted slightly, another feed picking up the sequence. This view was closer, clearer. As the door swung open, Mark's head turned slightly. He looked directly into the camera and Elena felt her heart stop. Those were Mark's eyes, alert and intentional despite his apparent weakness. The guards pushed him into what appeared to be an interrogation room. Standard table, 2 chairs, harsh overhead lighting. But something was off. There were medical monitors along one wall and what looked like restraint points built into the furniture. One guard moved to secure Mark's shackles to the table. The other stepped out of frame. Mark's lips moved, speaking to someone off camera. The footage had no audio, but Elena had learned to read lips during her years in signals intelligence. He was repeating coordinates. Elena scrambled for a pen, writing down the numbers as his lips formed them. She recognized the format. It matched the location from the helmet footage, but these were different numbers, somewhere else. Suddenly, the video quality improved dramatically. The camera zoomed in as Mark lifted his head fully, staring directly into the lens. His expression was fierce, determined. He began speaking clearly, deliberately, making sure his words would be understood even without sound. Elena's hands shook as she transcribed. "If you're seeing this, they lied to you. I'm not the only one they buried." The guards returned to frame, accompanied by men in lab coats. One carried a metal case. Mark's expression never changed as they approached, still staring into the camera, still speaking. But Elena couldn't watch anymore. The chip slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering onto her desk. Horror rose in her throat like bile as the implications crashed over her. They hadn't just covered up his death. They'd imprisoned him, experimented on him, made him disappear piece by piece. The video continued playing silently on her screen. Medical equipment being prepared, Mark's unflinching gaze, coordinates to God knew what other black sites. But Elena couldn't look. 6 weeks. He'd been alive for at least 6 weeks while she grieved, while she accepted their lies, while she burned his letter unread. The memory chip lay on her desk like a live grenade, containing truths she'd sought for decades but now wished she could unknow. In the frame on her wall, Mark's official portrait watched on. Young, proud, and forever betrayed by the country he'd sworn to serve. Elena's study had become a war room. 3 laptops ran different analysis software, dissecting every frame of the recovered footage. Sam Riddell, the podcast host who'd helped break the helmet story, sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by printouts. 2 former military analysts, volunteers from a veterans truth-finding network, occupied the small couch, comparing coordinates against declassified naval charts. "Play it again," Sam said, rubbing his tired eyes. "Frame by frame this time." Elena nodded, tapping the spacebar. On the center screen, Mark's face appeared in stuttering fragments. Each press advanced the video a fraction of a second, turning fluid motion into a series of still photographs. His lips moved with mechanical precision as they tracked the numbers he'd repeated. 17 to G39, one of the analysts murmured, plotting points on a digital map. 64 DG48W. The second analyst, a woman named Torres who'd specialized in Caribbean operations, suddenly sat up straighter. "Wait, go back 3 frames." Elena reversed the footage. Mark's face filled the screen, frozen mid-syllable. "There," Torres pointed. "Behind him, on the wall, that reflection." They leaned in closer. In the video's harsh institutional lighting, a faint shape was visible on the concrete, the ghostly outline of what looked like a logo or insignia, probably removed but leaving a subtle discoloration on the wall. Sam grabbed his phone, photographing the screen. "I've seen this before, during research for another story. Something about signals testing in the 80s. He pulled up a browser, typing rapidly. After a few minutes, he turned his phone to show them a declassified document header. The same geometric pattern was clearly visible, 3 overlapping triangles forming a hexagon. "Project Echo Chamber," Sam read. "Official designation, Advanced Communications Research Station Delta. Unofficial name among personnel, Ghost Key." "Ghost Key," Elena repeated softly. The name felt right, another piece of phantom evidence in a mystery built of shadows. Torres was already plotting the coordinates on a larger naval chart. "It's an island, barely more than a rock really, 2 miles long, less than a mile wide at its widest point. No civilian population, no regular maritime traffic." She traced a finger along shipping lanes that curved deliberately away from the location. "Look how the routes avoid it. That's not natural navigation, that's intentional isolation." The second analyst, Peterson, pulled up satellite imagery. The island appeared as a rough oval of green, surrounded by white sand and coral reefs. An airstrip cut across one end, its concrete weathered but still visible. Several buildings clustered nearby, their roofs caved in after decades of tropical storms. "No official record of military operations after 1982, Peterson noted, scanning through database entries. "Listed as decommissioned communications relay station in Navy property records, but look at the power readings." He switched to infrared imaging. Despite the apparent abandonment, faint heat signatures suggested functioning equipment somewhere beneath the ruins. "Someone's still paying the electric bill," Sam said grimly. Elena stared at the satellite view, trying to imagine Mark there, trying to picture what horrors might have happened in those now crumbling buildings. The coordinates he'd given weren't for the main facility. They pointed to a spot near the island's northern tip. "What's there?" she asked, indicating the location. Torres switched to historical imagery, cycling through years of photographs. The vegetation changed, Structures appeared and vanished, but that particular area remained consistently disturbed, the soil a different color than the surrounding ground. Mass grave, Peterson said quietly. He'd seen enough of them during his intelligence career to recognize the signs. Shallow, hastily dug, multiple bodies based on the size. Elena felt the room tilt slightly. She gripped the edge of her desk, steadying herself. How many other families had received the same lies she had? How many other lives had been erased, buried in that unmarked plot of Caribbean soil? Sam was already making calls, his voice low and urgent as he contacted journalists and veterans advocacy groups. Within hours, the evidence was spreading across secure channels, satellite images, document scans, video stills. A groundswell of demands for investigation began building. By midnight, major news outlets were running the story. The Pentagon's initial response was predictably dismissive. The island was simply an obsolete communications facility, they claimed. Any unusual activity could be explained by routine maintenance and environmental monitoring. But they hadn't counted on the power of modern imaging technology. Drone footage, captured by an anonymous operator, showed clear signs of recent activity: fresh tire tracks in the sand, new equipment cases visible through broken windows. When these images went viral, the official story began to crack. 3 days later, under mounting pressure from Congress and veterans organizations, a team of forensic investigators landed on Ghost Key. Elena watched their arrival via live satellite feed, projected onto her study wall. The familiar shapes of FBI evidence markers began appearing around the coordinates Mark had given, yellow numbered tags standing out against the dark soil. "They're finding something," Torres said, enhancing the image. Multiple excavation sites had appeared, carefully gridded and photographed. Teams in white protective suits moved methodically across the area, documenting every detail. The official announcement came that evening. In a hastily arranged press conference, a Pentagon spokesperson confirmed the discovery of human remains, multiple bodies, buried without markers or identification. Early forensic analysis suggested the deaths had occurred in the 1980s. "The Department of Defense is deeply committed to a thorough investigation of these discoveries," the spokesperson read from a prepared statement. "We take allegations of misconduct seriously and will cooperate fully with relevant authorities to determine the facts." Elena watched the press conference with cold fury. She recognized the careful language, the strategic passive voice that avoided assigning responsibility. They would investigate, analyze, study, but never reveal. The system was designed to examine itself in circles until public attention faded and new headlines pushed the story aside. Sam muted the television as the spokesperson began taking carefully screened questions. "They're already controlling the narrative," he said. "Notice how they're calling it discoveries instead of evidence? How they're treating it like some kind of archaeological find instead of a crime scene." Elena nodded. She'd seen this dance before. The way official investigations could become bureaucratic labyrinths where truth went to die. But this time was different. This time they had Mark's footage, his recorded testimony. This time there were coordinates and satellite images and heat signatures that couldn't be explained away. More importantly, they had names. In the days since the Pashi Bubtao and the Sudan, footage emerged. Other families had started coming forward. People who'd lost loved ones to similar training accidents and unauthorized absences during the same period. Each story added weight to the growing evidence that Ghost Key had been more than a communication station. Peterson's laptop chimed with an incoming message. "Preliminary DNA results," he reported, scanning the text. "They're matching samples against military records. First identification just came through. Master Chief Thomas Rivera, declared AWOL in 1984. Elena remembered that case. Rivera had vanished during a routine patrol, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. The Navy claimed he'd deserted, stripped his pension, denied his family benefits. Now, after 40 years, his bones had finally been found on a forgotten island, proving him no deserter at all. "How many others?" Elena asked softly. Torres pulled up thermal imaging of the gravesite. The disturbed ground formed a rough rectangle approximately 40 feet long by 20 feet wide. Based on standard burial spacing and soil density analysis, at least 30 bodies, maybe more. 30 lives erased, 30 families fed lies, 30 stories ending in unmarked Caribbean graves, while the truth gathered dust in classified files. The Pentagon spokesperson was still talking on the muted television, promising transparency while revealing nothing. Elena turned away from the screen, focusing instead on the wall of evidence she'd built over decades. Mark's service photo hung at the center, surrounded by newspaper clippings, official denials, and now, finally, proof. "They're going to bury it again," she said. "Different way, different words, but the same result. The system doesn't expose itself. It just files things away until people stop asking questions." Sam stood, stretching his cramped muscles. "Maybe. But this time we have something they didn't expect. Actual footage, actual bodies, actual coordinates. And we have the internet. Once information is out there, it's almost impossible to make it disappear completely." "Like breadcrumbs," Torres added. "Each piece of evidence leads to another. The grave leads to DNA. DNA leads to identities. Identities lead to dates and units and missions. Eventually, the truth assembles itself." Elena touched the screen showing the gravesite excavation. Somewhere in those careful grids and evidence markers lay the answers to 30 families' questions. Not closure. That was too simple a word for such a complex wound. But at least an end to decades of uncertainty. The Pentagon would investigate, she knew. They would hold hearings and commission studies and issue carefully worded reports. They would acknowledge procedural failures and communication breakdowns from a safely historical distance. They would apologize for past errors while protecting the systems and people who had committed them. But they couldn't make the evidence disappear. They couldn't erase the satellite images or suppress the DNA results. Most importantly, they couldn't silence the dead, who were finally speaking through soil samples and bone fragments and decades-old video footage. Elena's study had become a war room of truth. Morning light filtered through Venetian blinds, casting striped shadows across walls that told stories of disappeared men. 3 decades of collected evidence surrounded her: newspaper clippings, military documents, photographs faded by time but not forgotten. At her desk, a steaming cup of coffee grew cold beside a laptop displaying the latest DNA results from Ghost Key. The numbers were staggering. 37 bodies identified so far, with more tests pending. Each name represented a family who, like her, had lived for decades with official lies. She reached for the small box of red pins she'd started keeping after Mark's disappearance. Each one represented a life erased, a truth buried. With steady hands that belied her inner turmoil, she pressed a new pin into the large-scale Caribbean map mounted on corkboard. The metal point pierced the exact coordinates where the mass grave had been discovered. The pin joined others scattered across the region. 12 markers for the SEAL team members who vanished during Operation Scorpion Veil. Their locations were questions, not answers. Some pins marked last known positions, others possible detention sites mentioned in whispered conversations with retired intelligence officers. But this new pin, this one marked a certainty. Elena stepped back, studying the pattern they formed. The pins created a rough triangle, with Ghost Key at its eastern point. She'd spent years trying to connect these dots to understand the geography of disappearance. Now, with each new identification from the gravesite, the picture was becoming clearer. Her gaze shifted to the adjacent wall, where hundreds of index cards, photographs, and documents formed a massive timeline. Red string connected related events, creating a web of relationships and coincidences that had stopped feeling coincidental long ago. At the center hung Mark's service photo, not the formal portrait the Navy had used, but a candid shot from their brief marriage. He was smiling, unguarded, before shadows of doubt had crept into his eyes. The wall told other stories too. Newspaper headlines about missing servicemen, internal memos obtained through decades of FOIA requests, satellite images showing the gradual transformation of Ghost Key from active facility to apparent abandonment, medical records with suspicious gaps, personnel files with entire sections redacted. Each piece was a pixel in a larger image that had taken 36 years to come into focus. The truth hadn't arrived in a single revelation but had assembled itself slowly, painfully, like a jigsaw puzzle with most pieces deliberately hidden. Elena picked up a label maker from her desk, the same model she'd used during her Navy linguist days. The plastic strip emerged with a soft whirring sound as she typed. The words appeared in stark black letters against white background. For the ones who were never meant to come back. She placed the label carefully at the top of the evidence wall, smoothing it with her thumb to ensure it would stick. The phrase wasn't just Mark's final recorded words anymore. It had become an epitaph for everyone buried on that island, everyone whose disappearance had been explained away with comfortable lies. The morning sun had climbed higher, eliminating the striped shadows and illuminating the wall in clear, unforgiving light. Elena studied the collection she'd assembled. Faces of the missing, dates of vanishing, location markers, official denials. Some photographs were worn from handling, their edges soft with age. Others were recent additions, crisp and digital, showing the excavation teams at work on Ghost Key. Behind her, a drawer clicked open. The sound was slight but distinct in the quiet room. On her desk, the camera she'd been using to document everything still blinked its red recording light. It had become habit to film everything now, to ensure no detail would be lost, no truth could be erased again.